Hello, this is Professor Michael, and I'm going to do the lynda.com assignment for week 8. I am in my SQL Server Management Studio. You can see here I already have it open and I'm already signed in as my SA user. However, if you're not familiar with that, when you would open up SQL Server Management Studio, you get your connect to server dialog, and here is where you would put in your server name. By default, it's Windows authentication, so if you have a SQL Server user, like I'm using the SA user, you would change that to SQL Server authentication. You would put in your login and your password, and click connect. But I've already done that. So let's get in here. The first thing that the lynda.com video wants you to do is set up your database and set up your data. Now they're using a MySQL database. I've asked you to use SQL Server 2012. So I've had to convert the script, but before I go into the script, I'm going to create my database. I'm just going to create a basic database. So here I have use master. There's always a master database. In SQL Server, if you expand the system databases, there will always be a master there. You can't delete them. And you'll notice at the top when I click into a new query window, I have the option to select a database, but by default you will get master. And to open up a new query window, if you don't already have one open, you click new query and it brings it up. It's blank. You can type into it, but make sure that you have the master database selected. If you don't have it selected, this use statement will make sure that you are using the master database with whatever statements you have in the same query. So you can highlight queries to run separately, or if nothing's highlighted, you execute everything in the window. So here I have use master and create database world. I'm going to click execute, and you notice there when I hover over it, it says F5. F5 is the shortcut. So I'm going to click it, but I could have pressed F5. And so down at the bottom I get a message. It says commands completed successfully. But I don't see anything happening. That's because I have databases expanded, so I need to refresh it. If you right click on databases and go to refresh, you'll notice now that I have a world database listed, and I can expand it here. There's not anything in it, but I can expand the tables and see, okay, I just have my system tables and file tables. It's just a blank database, but it's here, so I can use it. If I want to save this file, I go up to File, Save As, and then it gives me the standard kind of Windows file. So I'm going to save this in my documents and just name it Create Database World. Oops. And by default, it will say save as type .SQL. You want to save it as that type because then you can open it up again in any SQL Server Management Studio application and run it to create a database world. Okay, so now I'm going to populate the data. You'll notice here I have create database world, SQL query, and then world MySQL. So I'm going to open up world MySQL. Now I downloaded this from the lynda.com assignment. It tells you to download the files that go with the assignment. And when I downloaded it, it was in a format that was appropriate for MySQL. There are a few differences in syntax between MySQL and SQL Server. One of the differences is some of the characters need to have a accent mark around them, but in SQL Server we didn't. So if you need to do any kind of big file manipulation like that, you can go to find and replace, and it's a normal, I got to this by clicking Control F. There's also a menu, the edit menu. But any kind of like normal Word or Excel, it's very similar to that. So you can put in the character that you want to find and then replace with, and I replaced it with a blank, and I did a replace all. So to update these files, there were a couple other things that I needed to do, but that was primarily the big change, and that just took me a second. So now I have all of this data that they've provided me. They create 3 different tables, and then they insert a bunch of data. So to create a table, and we've done this, you would have a create table statement, and then you have the name of the table, and then all of the columns with their data types and any other specifications for the column. What I've done here is I'm checking to see if this table exists. I'm going to bounce this down since my resolution's a little lower. I say if exists, and this is a select statement to select from a special table, sys.objects. That's a SQL Server table that stores all of the tables in each database, where the object ID is equal to this dbo.city. So if it finds this table in the database that I'm working in, it will do the drop table statement. That way I can always create this table. Because otherwise, if I don't drop the table first, if it already exists, then I'll get an error saying the table already exists, you can't recreate the table, which is not an issue. If you want it to be the same, but if you've made any changes to that create table statement, then it's not going to create it. So just wanted to show you that. And then an insert statement, this inserts data into the city table once it's created, and it will insert the values that I have for all of the columns in the order that the columns are listed. So the values 1, if you kind of match it to the table, 1 is for the ID. Here, there is a name. The 3rd one is the country code. The 4th one is the district. And the 5th one is the population. Now these data types have to match how the column is defined. So here I have an int. It does not need single quotes around it because it is a number. Here I have a string, and that's specified with single quotes, and that's a character field. And here I have a big int, and I have a number rather, and that's a big int, so that will be fine. So you have to make sure that those data types are correct. But I'm not going to run this right away. What I want to make sure of is that I'm running this in the world database. So we saw the use statement before, but this time I'm just going to use this drop-down menu, and I'm going to choose the database world. And so when I click over here, if I see world in this drop-down, then I know that I'm operating in the world database. So now I'm going to hit F5 to execute. Again, I could click this. I'm going to click F5. And you notice at the bottom here it says executing query. There's a lot of data to insert, so it may take a while. That's okay. It comes back and it says query executed successfully. So this is how I know what's happened. And then one row affected. Every time that you do an insert, it will tell you how many rows were affected. Anytime you do an update, it gives you that feedback. So you can scroll through them, but that's not really valuable information. But over here, I don't see my tables. So what I need to do is I need to right-click again and go down to refresh. It will collapse my tables. I expand my tables, and here I see the tables that I created. But you'll notice here I said create table city, and now I'm seeing DBO city. That's my schema name, DBO dot table name, city. The default schema for this database, and for any database unless it's specified, is the SQL Server DBO schema. So that's fine. We'll get into creating our own schemas and assigning the schema for the table. But when you don't specify a schema, it will go with the database's default schema. Okay, so we don't need this anymore. I'm going to save it off. It's already saved. So I can just click this save icon or do a Control S. I'm going to close that. I'm done with this as well. I'm going to close that. So I'm going to take a look at my tables. I like to have them expanded when I'm going to work on them so that I can see the columns and the table names. Just makes it a little easier for you. Here we go. And you'll notice that some of the columns have a special icon next to them, and that means that it is a primary key if it has the key icon. If you want to see your foreign keys, you can expand keys and constraints. Now, since this script was given to us, we didn't look through what the relationships were. If you are curious about the relationships, which you should be when you're working with the data, you need to be able to see those relationships. This is a little difficult to read through, but there's this nice database diagrams area. You can go into that. The first time that you go into it for a database, it will say that you don't have one or more of the support objects. Do you want to create them? You say yes. Then you can click on this. You can right-click, do a new database diagram. It should come up in a moment. And then it will ask you which tables you want to add. I want to see all 3 tables and I want to see the relationships. So I click on all 3 of them. I did a shift click. I click add and I close it. All right, and here I notice I don't have any foreign keys to any of these tables. I don't have anything that I can, if I had any foreign keys, I would have the arrows that you see from a table to another table. So these constraints must not be foreign keys. So if I want to know what they are, I can right-click on them. I can go to Script Constraint As, Create To, New Query Window. It's a default. Okay. So this will tell me how to create this. This is going to do an alter table, add default, and this is just a space for country code. So now I realize why I don't have any relationships between these tables. But this is a nice way to view the data. You can print this out. You can kind of move them around so that it makes sense for you. However you need to see it so that you can work with the data, do that. I'm going to close this. And since I don't care about the keys because there's no foreign keys, I'm going to close those. And that way I can see my columns. Okay. So here I have my world database. And I'm going to work with it. Okay, so I'm back into my query window here. If you notice, I have some red text. And it's going to say, I don't know this database world. Not familiar with it. So if I scroll up to the top, I can right-click on the very top, and that's going to give me the world database not underlined. Now here you'll see that everything else looks like it's underlined, looks like it's wrong, but that's because these tables haven't been refreshed yet. So, or rather, our database that we're using hasn't been refreshed yet. So I'm going to click on this and choose world. So now I'm in my database world. The script has been updated to look to that database instead of the other database that I was using. Oh, sorry about that. And so now you'll notice that there's no red underline. So now we have it ready to go. Now, if you haven't scripted this before, this is not going to be an issue for you. But if you ever do experience that, there is some kind of refresh problems that I've experienced in SQL Server Management Studio, and usually you just have to refresh the whole thing. Sometimes you have to open up the script again, whatever it takes, so that you can open up your script, make sure you're working in the right database, and that you're going to execute your statements correctly. Okay, so now I have a bunch of statements here, and I put these here because if I watched the video at the same time, it would be distracting. So I went through the video and I wrote the SQL statements that are required for the exercise through step 7, with some differences because the create table statements and such we did last week, so we didn't need to cover those. So first he goes through the select statement. Here I have a select statement that just has a string, so you can select from nothing. So this is just going to return hello world. It's going to return exactly what you put in. This doesn't have a whole lot of value, but you can have these in addition to columns from tables, and sometimes you need to kind of label something or pass something in. So just to know that it's a possibility is good. But a basic select statement that you'll see is this select star. This is an asterisk symbol here, and this is a table. I know the name of the table because I can go to my database and I can see here's dbo.country, so I can type that in. Now this star means select everything from the table country. So I'm going to run that. And again, you can highlight things and run them individually, or you can press F5 and run everything. I want to run everything individually here. This is the table that we created with the script just a few minutes ago. And this is the data that we inserted. There's a lot of data. You'll notice here on the left-hand side, these are the number of records that I have. I have 239 records. And then everything else is a column that we created with the data. So you can take a look at it, scroll through it, but it's a whole lot to process. So we're going to limit that data. Now select count is a special function. And you notice when I mouse over this, I get some information about the function. SQL Server Management Studio is great at giving you these hints and more information so that you can work a bit quicker. So select count with the star returns the number of records in the table, so in the entire table. And so if I scroll down here again to remind myself, this says I have 239 records. So I would expect my count for everything to be 239. So let's see what it is. Hey, all right. So it returns back 239. Now this says no column name. I'm not selecting a column. I'm just selecting the count. So it just returns me the result in this kind of temporary table. All right, I can select specific columns. So the select star will select all columns from the table, but what if I'm just interested in a couple of things? So if I do a select count, or rather select star, I notice that I have columns code, name, continent, region, surface area. I'm not interested in all of that. What I want to know is for each country, so let me find where the countries are stored. All right, Afghanistan. Okay, so that's in the column name. I want to know the life expectancy. That's in the column life expectancy. So I'm just going to select those two columns. Let's do an F5 there. Okay, so I get name, everything, life expectancy, everything. I should still have 239 records, and I do. Okay. Now here, I've changed the query a little bit, and I'm going to type this out so that you can see what comes up. So if I'm typing a query in SQL Server Management Studio, I get some help. So notice how I get these little menus. I can click on it. It knows what database I'm using, so it knows what tables I have, what schemas I have, and then once you have a table name in, like I do now, instead of select star, I can go back and it will know what columns I have available and will list them so that I don't have to type the whole thing out. Another nice thing here is that I can type the table name. It gives me that. Then a dot, and then it gives me all the columns in that table. So I can just browse through them and pick one if I don't remember the name of it. I can also just append that on if I think that it's more readable. I don't have to just use it to select. But this will give me the same exact results as this. It's just a little easier to write and sometimes a little easier to read, depending on where you're using it. Now you notice I have DBO here in front of the country. That is correct, and that's the query that you want to use. You want to do schema name dot table name. However, in this database, I only have 3 tables, and I only have one schema for each of those tables. So I don't have to worry about using the schema name. And a lot of times you'll see examples without the schema name. So I just wanted to put this in here to show you that you can just say country, and when you do that, the table name will automatically use the name of the database that you have selected and the default schema. So this will only work if that country table is in the default schema DBO, which it is. If you mouse over it, it tells you the fully qualified name, which is the database name .schema.table name. That will also give me the same exact rows, just a different way of writing it. And here's another way to write it. So I have a table name. I can have a shortened version of the name after it. So if I have country, I decided to put C because it's a little shorter, especially if I'm going to prefix the name with that. If I mouse over that, you see that it's a table name. But that is what I'm using as an alias for that table name. So if I type that out, I'm going to use, let's do CO. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be any characters here. So if I have select star from country CO, I can kind of go back and say CO dot, and it will give me the same number of columns that country gave me. So that's kind of a nice way to write it. You can also have an alias for the actual column name. So if I run this, I get my results in the bottom. The columns at the top are the actual column names in the table. But if I want to change that because I think that name is not very descriptive, if I want that to actually say country, I can say column name as alias. Oops, I do not want to do that. All right, as alias. And then I don't have to have an alias on every column, but I can. And the next column is as life. So let's see how that changes the results. I get the same number of results, 239 rows. You can see that down here at the bottom. But the name of my column is country and life instead of name and life expectancy. I can make those uppercase. I can make it look a little prettier. Let's do that here. Then I have country and life. It's just for formatting, makes it a little easier to deal with your data. Okay, so I can select as many columns as I want. I can select every single column on the table by using commas to separate the column names. That will give you the same result as a star if I use every single column name. But here I've decided to do name, continent, and region. Now this is a lot of data. So what if I'm only interested in one continent, but I want the same columns, but just tell me what the name and the region are for the continent of Europe. So I've got one Europe here, one Europe here. This is impossible to go through. I can use a where clause. So here, I'm going to type this out. So I'm going to select the name, continent, Oops, if I can spell, region, from, country, where, continent. Now it knows which table I'm using, so it'll bring it up now. Equals, and it underlines it because I don't have anything. If I go back here, I just have where continent. That's not a valid where clause, so it tells me that that's wrong. And that's okay. That's supposed to tell me that something is equal to something. But I'm typing, so. And then I want to do a single quote. Now you notice everything below it is now in, looks like a string. It's in red. That's because I haven't closed it yet. So don't kind of freak out when that happens. This time I'm going to do Asia. Then I'm going to close it. Okay, so that's a string. I have to put it in single quotes. And then I'm going to end my statement with a semicolon. And then I'm going to highlight it, press F5. And here I get the name and the region where the continent is equal to Asia. It doesn't really make sense to see Asia over and over and over again. So I'm going to remove continent. And I just want to see the name and the region. So again, I'm going to highlight this, press F5. Great, okay. So in this case, I get results back just for Asia. I know they're just for Asia. Somebody else might not, but if I have a spreadsheet and the title is Asia, I get these values. I can see them a little easier. Okay. So we talked about count before. I'm going to run that. We get 239. Count star is not the only way that you can use count. Count is a function. Again, if you highlight it or hover over it rather, you get some information. Built-in function count, parentheses expression, returns an int. So it's always going to return a number. It is the count, but you can have any kind of, you can have different kinds of expressions in there, not just the star. So I'm going to show you what's in country here. We'll do a select star again. And here I have lots of different columns, but I have this column here. If I want to know the count from the table country where this column has a value, then I can use this column in my count function. So you'll notice I have null, 1919, 1975, null. Anywhere that I see null, this column doesn't have a value for that particular row. So I have a total of 239 rows, but I wonder how many rows I have where I have this independence year. So this is the year that they gained independence. 192. Okay, good to know. So if I know that that data is valid, I could make some assumptions on that. If I do 239 minus 192, the result of that might be the number of countries that don't have independence. But I would again have to know that that is valid data. And then if we select that, we can see all of the nulls here as well, and we will get all 239 rows. So if you do a select, you get nulls. If you do a select count with the column name, you get the number of records where that is, where that has a value, where it's not null. Okay, so you can combine these as well. I can have just a normal column name, and then I can have a count with a particular column. And here I did an as, so this is my alias from my table. And I did a group by. So first, I'm going to eliminate the group by here. Let's see what we get back when we just run this. And a double dash is a comment here in SQL Server. Okay, so if you were just running, actually, let's look at the error message. The error messages give you so much to go on. So column country.continent. So I don't see country.continent, but it's continent from country. So SQL Server will put that together because that's what it means to them. It's kind of a shortcut not to put the table name. is invalid in the select list because it is not contained in either an aggregate function. Okay, so aggregate function means something that is going to aggregate the data. It's going to put it together. So a group by is an aggregate function, but it's a specific one. So it says, or the group by clause. And that's because, well, let's run this. Let's see the result when we actually add the group by. Okay. And that's because this statement here says, I want to know the count of countries on a given continent. But unless I'm going to group by that continent, group the count of the countries by that continent, then I'm not going to have valid data. It doesn't make any sense. So when you see that group by statement, and if you see some kind of a, I want to know the count of this for this column, you know that those have to go together. Okay. Now we've done a couple of select statements on single tables and used a couple of functions, but now let's look at some data from multiple tables. Now we looked at it before, there's no foreign key relationships, but that doesn't mean we can't join data. We can join data by anything that we want, anything that makes sense. The tables don't have to have those explicit foreign keys. That's for data integrity, so that you can't insert anything that doesn't exist in the other table, but you can join on any kind of information to get a certain result set back. So here, I'm going to type this. So I'm going to select, let's say right now, star from country. So we've done this. We've done the country table, right? Let's remind ourselves of what it looks like. That's my country table. But I also want to see things from my city table. So let me look at my city table. Okay. And what's interesting about your city table is all of these cities need to belong into a country, of course, because they're cities. And it has a country code here. So wouldn't it be interesting to see some information together between the country and the city? So what if I wanted to know for this city more information about the country than the code? So for this city, what's the continent? For this city, what's the actual name of the country? Because I may not recognize that country code. And if I want to do that, then I need to pull out the country code from the country table and get more information on it. And that's what joining tables is for. So I'm going to do, let's select name. Actually, let's not do that yet. Let's select continent. Again, cannot spell here. I know continent is on the country table. I just looked at it. It's a column. And what is here on the city table? Let's say district. And I have to do from. All right, so I'm doing the, I want to know some more information about the country and the city here. And so I'm going to select from country, but I only want to select a few things. So let's do this. Let's see country again. Now let's say I want to know the name of the country, right? So that's completely valid. So let's run that. Okay. Now let's look at the whole table again. And then I have a code here, so maybe I need the code because it's also in the city table. So I'm going to pull that in. So I have a name and a code. Great. I kind of know which country goes with which code. So I'm going to go back to my city table, and I'm going to see, here's my country code, right? So let's add the city table. Oh, when I added the city table, it says ambiguous column name name. So there's an issue with having two tables that have two column names with the same name. It's not a big issue. We just need to prefix it with either the table name. So I know this, I wanted to come from my country table. So it's country.name. Or I could specify an alias and use that instead. Either way. So now I know which name, but what data do I want from my city table? Let's do country code. Now that's the same data, we believe. Since there's not a foreign key, we don't know, but we believe it's the same data. But I can use it because it's a different column name without an alias or a table name in front of it. So this should give me all of the country names and the codes. Oh, and let's say also the city name. So again, I will have to prefix that since that column name is in both tables. So here I get name. Now which name? I don't know here. Code, country code, and name. So it's probably good to have an alias so that I know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to put as country name. And then here I'm going to do as city name. That way I know what I'm talking about. And actually, just to make it a little friendlier. Oh, I can't do that. So there's no spaces allowed. You have to put any kind of space into a single quote. So oftentimes I do an uppercase letter, but if you want it to be really user-friendly and you want to have a space, just put that in single quotes. Okay? So we're going to highlight this again. And now you'll notice the column names have changed. Country name, city name, country code, code. Now I'm thinking that this is something that I want to join on. As I start looking at it, I'm not sure. Oh, but there I get some duplicates. So okay, I can kind of make the assumption, where's USA in the code? There's USA. Okay. So I can kind of make that assumption. It kind of makes sense. That's not a good way to figure out data. You need to understand the database, but since we don't, let's say that makes sense. So I'm going to join on that. So here I've done kind of a shortcut to get data out of two tables, and that's just by having a comma separating the table names. But now I want to actually only get the data that exists in both tables. So that's a join. So I'm going to select the same data. Yeah, we'll keep the codes in. That's fine. We're going to take these codes out because they don't really matter. It's kind of duplicate name or data. But for now, let's leave them in. And white space doesn't matter in SQL Server, so you can make this look nice and neat for you. So put in as many spaces, make the data as small as you want per line. All right, so this is from DBOTA country, same thing. I'm going to do the alias again. But this is where it's different. So it's from, so I want some data from country. I want to join on my city. Did I have an alias on that? No. Okay. I should probably just push this down so I can see it. Okay. So join on my city, and I'm going to say I want to join on code and country code. So I know that, so All right, so here, let's type in the whole city name. Oh, rather on, sorry. The whole city name. I know that country code comes from city here. Again, it underlines it before you have everything, so that's okay. And then I know that code is on my country table, and so I want to match those two. So it's just kind of a matcher. So I'm going to run that, and I want to know only the rows where these two are the same. Oh, and I should point out here, down here, because I'm selecting all rows from both tables, I have a lot of rows. I have 974,881 rows. So now this should be significantly smaller. And it is. So I have 4,079 rows. These are the rows where I have the same country code in both tables. I'm going to remove that country code because it doesn't make much sense. I just want to know country name, city name. So let's remove code and country code. And that shows you that you don't have to be displaying the values that you join your tables on, and most of the time you're not. So this gives me a nice little list. But then I have Afghanistan, Netherlands. Do I have any order for this list? Is it easy to kind of run through? Looks like by default I'm going to have that country name order, but there's no guarantee of that. You will get a different, potentially a different record in row 10 every time that you run this. It'll still be the same number of rows. It's just that they're not going to be in any particular order. But if you want them to be, you can put an order in. So I want to order by country name. And by default, that will be an ascending order. So it's going to start, since this is a string, it's going to be, or alphanumeric rather, it's going to be alphabetical. If it was a number, then it would order it by the numbers. You have to be careful with some zero if you start your numbers with zeros. But if I want to change this, I can do descending, and that will give me the reverse order. So then I get the Z's first. And just because ascending is the default doesn't mean you can't specify it. If you want to specify it, it might make it a little clearer for you. So there, I have a nice list of all of my countries and cities joined together. Okay. Now what if I just wanted to know information from a table where the country was the US or where the country was something? So I just want a limited amount of data. So here I'm just selecting the country code, the name and the population from the city table where my country code is equal to Great Britain, GBR. So that gives me a nice little list. It's only 81 rows, gives me something a bit more manageable, and I can limit that by anything. So if I want to put in USA, because I know that that's one of the country codes in the table, I can show that as well. If I want, so that's an equals. That country code column has to have exactly USA uppercase characters in that field. But I may also want to see where the population is greater than a certain amount, or greater than or equals to. So I can do those functions as well. So this is greater than or equal to 5 million. Okay? So that gives me some nice results. I can do greater than, I can do less than, I can do where it's equal to a certain number. There's also a like. Sometimes you don't want just specific data, but where a certain kind of data is in that column. So when we were talking about names and I said split up first name and last name, that's important because sometimes you'll get the first name first, sometimes you'll get the last name first. And so if I'm looking for a specific matching character, if I put in Doris Day, comma Doris is not going to show up. But if I do something where I have a like and I have a wildcard character, and so if something like Doris, both of those names would come up. We might get a lot of other Dorises, but it's a way to get to the data. So this like statement, so where name, the column name, this name here, the data in that column, I want to show it where there is a Z as the last character. And I do that with special syntax. I'm going to do select star, this time from city, where name, like. I do a single quote, and I can do Z. That's going to give me different results. So like doesn't have to have a wildcard. I can do like Z, and it's going to give me the same results as equal to Z, because there's no wildcard there. So it's going to be the single character Z. However, if I want to know where a name starts with Z, that would be, all right, so there we go. Name starts with Z. If I want to know where a name has a Z anywhere in it, I can put a wildcard, and this is a % sign, if you can't see that exactly. But if I want to know if there's a Z anywhere in that name, it starts with a wildcard, has a Z, ends with a wildcard. I get to see that. So the names that start with, the names that have a Z in between, and the names that end with Z, I will get all of those. So it's a nice way to search through data when you're not sure exactly what you're looking for, or if you have some pattern you need to find. I can also do specific values, but more than one value in a where clause. So this will give me the city, country code, name, and population from the city table, where the country code is either USA or Canada or Mexico. So all of those will show up. So I have Canada here, Mexico, and USA. So that's a nice little search function, and that is the in. I can also combine these functions. I can do and or. So I can say, give me, for these countries, all of the country code, name, and population, where the population is greater than a certain value. So now I have 496 rows. This should be smaller. And I have 20 rows, so just the biggest cities in these countries. I can combine any of the where clauses with and or. So here's another, this is another like statement. If I get all of these government form and head of state from country, where head of state like wildcard ELIS wildcard, then I'm going to get Elizabeth II several times. Now if I run the next statement, you'll notice the only difference is the distinct. Then I'm going to get the government forms, so distinct government form, where the head of state is like Elizabeth. So I'm only going to get 6 rows, and that's because there's not that many government forms, but there's a lot of records in this table where it's a republic, where it's a constitutional monarchy, and so I get the heads of state there. But that gives me only the unique government forms rather than all of the duplicated government forms for every row in the table. So you see how this is different. Okay. Now we've seen this. I can select name and district where country code is equal to USA. I can then order that data by district. So then I get to see Alabama, Alaska, Arizona. I can then order by district and name. So now I get something a little more meaningful here. So I have district. This is in alphabetical order, ascending. But then within this district, I have the names of the cities. And this is also in alphabetical order after the district. So for Alabama, I have an alphabetized list of the cities. And I get that by doing an order by with comma separated values. Now we've seen the function count. There are also many other functions that you can use in a select statement. I'm going to mouse over this. This is the built-in function average, and it returns an int. So this will give me an average life expectancy. The name of the column has an alias, so it's going to be AVGLE from the country table where life expectancy is not null. So if I want an average on a life expectancy, I might not want to include these blank values. That may give me some data that isn't what I expect. And then I'm going to group it by region and order by my average life expectancy. So let's run this and we'll talk a little more about it. Okay, so here's my column, which is my average. And then this is my region. And you'll notice that it's grouped by region, the average. And then it's ordered by the average. So it goes from low to high. This is not null is special. It's different in some different databases. But null is special in databases. Yes, it's a record with a column that doesn't have a value, but it has to store null, but it actually has a value. So you can't just say is like not equals to null or is equal to null. That's not going to give you valid results. So you need to do is not null, and that'll give you all the values or all the records where there's a value. There's a lot of different functions. I would suggest going out and looking for them when you need them. Okay, so now we've selected a bunch of data. There's a bunch of different ways you can select data. Anytime that you want to go and figure out how to select data, you can do a Google search. You can look it up in your book. But now you know some of the options that are there. Now we're going to go through and update a record, and then we're going to delete it. So we're going to select from country where code is equal to USA. I should only get one record, and I do. Now let's just say that the code for the country of the United States has been changed to USA2 for some strange reason. So I need to change the data only for this record. So I want to make sure first that I know that I only have this record or the records that I expect before I update them. So I'm going to select it. So I've selected it. I have one record. That's exactly what I expect. So now I feel comfortable updating it. I'm going to type this. So if I want to update this to USA2, I do an update statement. Update the name of the table, set the name of the column, and again it comes up, equal to whatever I want it to be equal to. This is a string, so it has to be in single quotes. Where, I want to make sure I have this same where clause because this is what I expected. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this because I don't want to mess that up. Because once I update, I'm committing automatically in here. So once I update, it's done. So I want to make sure I have it right. So I'm going to press F5. Oh, string or binary data would be truncated. Okay. So what this means is that this code is not big enough to hold my 4 characters. And so truncated means it would be cut off. So I don't want that to happen. So let's say US2. Let's try that. Okay, so now it updated. So if you look at the data type of code in your table, so I'm going to just cruise over here to country, and I have code. I notice that it's a character 3. That's why I can't put 4 characters in it. It's going to tell me, nope, you can only store 3 characters. Okay, so now my update's done. So if I run this select statement again, where it's equal to USA, I get no records. And that's what I expect because that code has been updated to US2. So if I replace that code with the value US2, voila, I get the same record with the different code. Okay. So now I want to delete this record. So let's say that for some reason the United States doesn't exist anymore. I want it out of the country table. Or maybe I'm moving it somewhere else. So I'm going to do a delete statement. So let's delete from country where code equals US. Let's say I accidentally put in 3. Now again, I would want to select this data first to make sure it's right, but let's say I forget. Down here, you'll see 0 rows affected. You want to make sure you check that because it doesn't give you an error if it can't find it on a delete, nor will it on an update. But if there are no rows affected, you didn't do what you thought you were going to do. So let's go ahead and copy this. Now I know this is going to give me 1 row, so now I should have 1 row affected. Great. So now when I try to select this, I'm not going to get a row, which is what I expect. So that's perfect. All right. Now here I have select star from country, city, and country language. These are all 3 of my tables. So give me all the data for all of them. Now let me try to find a date time on any of these. If I go through all of these data types, I don't have any date or date time for date functions. I have decimal, I have character, but I want to add a column with a date time to the city table to tell me when something was updated in the record. So there's an alter table statement. If you don't have something in your table, you can alter it. So here I've done alter table, the name of the table, add the name of the column and the column data type, which is date time. So I expect to have an update time column on my city table. So you'll notice here it's executing the query. This may take a little while. And it is. And you'll see a little timer down here. It kind of gives you the time that it took. It also tells you where you're at. This is in the database world, how many rows are affected, who your user is, and what your server name is, which is nice that you get all of that information right up front. Still executing. While we're doing that, let's look at this data here. So this is showing me all the columns from all 3 tables. So we have the country code and the name and the government form, the locale name, the population, independence year, the name of the country, the name of the continent. Okay, so now I get command completed successfully with alter table. So now I should be able to crawl over here to the city table. I'm going to right click on it, do a refresh. It collapsed my columns, I expand them, and I see my update time, and it's a date time. So now I want to populate the data. Let me look at the data first here. Let me show you. All right, I'm going to select star from city, selecting all of my columns, all of the records. I get a null for update time. And I did not specify the column as a not null, otherwise that would be a problem. I'd have to insert the data along with it. But since it's nullable, I can have null in every single record. But I don't want to. I want to update that time with an initial value. So there's an update statement. So update the table name, set the column name equal to a value. Now dates are special. With something like, if I want to do, when I did the update before with a string, I could just put in the string. But now, oh, I changed this. That's not a valid column name. Okay, because the name of my column is update time. But with a date, there's a built-in function to get the date, which will return me a date time, and it will give me the current date if nothing is specified in the function. So I'm going to run this, and this should update all of my rows, 4,079 rows, so that's everything. Great. I'm going to select star from city again. And now I don't have any nulls, and I can check that. Let me make sure I don't have any nulls. Okay, so select star from city where update time is not null. I should not get any, rather is null, sorry. I should not get any rows. Great, I didn't. So that gives me a nice, easy way to populate some data if I add a column after the fact. So that is it. There were a few other things covered in that video down to step 7. I think you should view it, take a look at it. You don't have to do the exercises, but you definitely need to get familiar with SQL Server Management Studio. I'm going to post the data file that I used to populate this data. So you can do exactly what I did. You can create the database, you can run that file to create the tables and to populate the data. And then you can practice with your select statements, with your update statements, with your delete statements, and go nuts. You can't mess it up because you can just create another database and populate the data again. So practice around, get familiar with some of the menus here, get familiar with the T-SQL statements, mostly just basic SQL here, but the syntax is specific for SQL Server. So get familiar with that, and that will prepare you for the test. Also, you should review the parts in the book that we have covered so far, just so that you are prepared for the multiple choice part of the test too. All right, I hope you have a good evening, and I hope this is beneficial, and hope that you do well on test 2. Thank you.